safe but shaken. The next day, I went to the village elder, Mr. Thorne, who'd lived in Duskbloom all his 80 years. He listened to my story in his cluttered study, his face grim. "She's been here since the valley was young," he said. "We leave offerings flowers, bread to keep her quiet, but she still hunts. You're marked now. She'll try again." "Is there a way to stop her?" I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a leather-bound book from his shelf, its pages brittle. "There's a ritual, but it's risky. You'd need to draw her out, and burn her anchor something she's tied to, like a tree or stone, but if you fail, she'll take you." I didn't tell Mira about the ritual. I knew she'd lock me in the cottage if I tried. Instead, I waited, watching the forest, memorizing its paths. On the last night of summer, the melody returned, stronger than ever. I slipped out, the charm in one hand, a lighter, and a bundle of sage in the other. The forest glowed, the air thick with her spell. I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on the ground, and followed the song to the clearing. She was there, her form shimmering, her voice a blade of longing. "Look at me," she said, her words honey and poison. I didn't. Instead, lighting the sage and tossing it at her feet, the smoke curled upward, and she shrieked, her form flickering. In the clearing's center was a gnarled tree, its bark pulsing like a heartbeat. I doused it with oil from Mira's stores and set it ablaze. The lady's scream tore through the forest, the ground shaking, but I kept my eyes on the flames, never on her. When the tree was ash, the melody stopped, the air cleared, and the forest was just trees again. I stumbled home, singed and shaking, and found Mira waiting, her eyes wet. She didn't scold me, just held me tight. The lady was gone, or so I hoped, but I still wear the charm, and at night I keep my eyes closed, just in case. Terror from the fallen invisible fence. In the small town of Grey Hollow, where fog draped the streets like a shroud and the wind carried whispers of old secrets, our family home stood at the end of a quiet lane. It was a modest, weather-worn house, its paint chipped and its porch creaking underfoot. The backyard was bordered by a low stone wall, barely knee-high, that everyone assumed was just a relic from some long-forgotten garden. But the elders of Grey Hollow called it something else, the invisible fence. They said it wasn't the stones that mattered, but what they held back, something no one could see, yet everyone feared. I was 17, home from boarding school for the summer, when I learned what happened when that fence fell. My name is Caleb, and I'd always thought Grey Hollow's stories were just that, stories. My parents, both teachers, dismissed the town's superstitions as nonsense. But my great-uncle Amos, who'd lived in the house before us, was different. He'd visit sometimes, his eyes cloudy with age, muttering about keeping the line strong. I thought he was just eccentric until the night the terror began. It was a humid August evening, the air thick with the scent of rain and pine. I was in my room, headphones on, when I heard a crash from the backyard like stones tumbling. Followed by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the walls. I yanked off my headphones and ran to the window. The stone wall was in pieces, as if something had smashed through it. The backyard was dark, but the air shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. The wall was a mess, half its stones scattered across the grass. Beyond it, the forest loomed, its trees denser than I remembered, their branches swaying without wind. The hum was louder now, pulsing in my chest, and the air felt wrong too heavy, too cold for summer. I swept the flashlight beam across the trees, and for a moment, I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, its edges blurred like a smudge on glass. It vanished when the light hit it, but my skin prickled with the certainty that I was being watched. I ran back inside, locking the door, and called for my parents. They were in the kitchen, puzzled but unconcerned. "Probably just kids messing around," Dad said, peering out the window. Mom nodded, but her eyes lingered on the broken wall, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I didn't tell them about the shape or the hum. They wouldn't believe me. The next night, the hum returned, louder, joined by a scratching sound, like claws on wood. It came from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I checked the backyard again, and more stones were gone, as if something was dismantling the wall piece by piece. The forest seemed closer, its edge creeping toward the house. I called Uncle Amos, who lived in a nursing home an hour away. His voice was shaky but firm. "The fence is down, isn't it?" he said. "You need to fix it, Caleb. It's not just stones, it's a barrier." "A barrier for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Something old, something that doesn't belong here." He told me the story over the phone, his words clipped with urgency. The stone wall wasn't just a garden feature. It was part of a ritual laid down generations ago to seal a rift, a tear in the world that led to somewhere else. The elders called it the invisible fence because its true power wasn't in the stones, but in the symbols carved beneath them, hidden in the earth. If the fence fell, the rift would open, and whatever lived on the other side could cross over. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Rebuild it," he said, "and don't look at what comes through." That night, I gathered the scattered stones, my hands shaking as the hum grew louder. The scratching turned to footsteps, heavy and uneven, circling the house. I worked fast, stacking the stones as best I could, but they felt wrong, like they were resisting me. The air grew colder, the shimmer in the forest brighter. I saw the shape again, closer now. Its form shifting, sometimes human, sometimes not. It didn't have a face, but I felt its hunger, its curiosity. I called my friend Maya, the only person in Grey Hollow who didn't laugh at ghost stories. She came over with a backpack full of salt and sage, things her grandmother swore by. "We need to find the symbols," she said, digging around the wall's base. "We found them faint carvings in the dirt, spirals and lines that made my head ache to look at. Some were smudged, as if something had clawed them away." The footsteps grew closer, now inside the yard. Maya sprinkled salt over the stones, muttering words her grandmother had taught her. The hum faltered, but the shape didn't leave. It stood at the edge of the forest, watching. I kept my eyes on the ground, remembering Uncle Amos's warning. Maya grabbed my hand, her voice steady. "Keep working. Don't look up." We rebuilt the wall, stone by stone, tracing the symbols with a stick when we couldn't find the originals. The air grew heavier, the hum now a low growl. Something brushed past me, cold and sharp, like a blade of ice. I flinched, but kept my eyes down, stacking the last stone. Maya lit the sage, its smoke curling upward, and the growl became a wila sound that wasn't sound, but a pressure that made my ears pop. Then, silence. The air cleared, the shimmer faded, and the forest was just trees again. The wall stood, uneven but whole. We stepped back, panting, and I risked a glance at the forest. Nothing. No shape, no hum, just the quiet of a summer night. The next day, I visited Uncle Amos. He looked frailer than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. "You did well," he said. "But it's not over. The rift is still there, and the fence won't hold forever." "What's on the other side?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one knows, but it knows us." We never spoke of it again, but I noticed things after that night: scratches on the back door, a faint hum when the wind was still, shadows that moved against the light. My parents didn't believe me when I tried to explain, so I stopped trying. Maya and I kept watch, checking the wall every week, reinforcing the symbols with salt and ash. The shape hasn't returned, but I feel it sometimes, waiting just beyond the trees. The house is still ours, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. It's a guard post, a line between our world and something else. Every night, I check the locks and listen for the hum, knowing the invisible fence might fall again, and next time, stones alone might not be enough. Before that grave was moved. In the sleepy hamlet of Crow's End, where fields of barley swayed under a perpetually gray sky, our family farm had stood for generations. The house was old, its timbers groaning with stories, its windows fogged with age. Beyond the barn, at the edge of our land, was a small graveyard. Just 3 headstones, moss-covered and tilting like weary sentinels. The graves belonged to the Halloways, the family who'd built the farm in the 1700s. Everyone in Crow's End knew the graves were untouchable, a silent pact woven into the town's bones. I was 16, too young to understand why, until the summer they decided to move one of those graves. My name is Sarah, and I'd grown up hearing whispers about the Halloways. They were the town's founders, but their legacy was shadow tales of strange rituals, of a pact with the land that kept Crow's End fertile while neighboring towns withered. The graveyard was sacred, or cursed, depending on who you asked. My father, a practical man with calloused hands, scoffed at the stories. Just old graves, he'd say. But my grandmother, who lived with us, would clutch her rosary and mutter, "Leave the dead where they lie." That summer, a developer from the city bought the land next to ours, planning a strip mall. The problem was the smallest grave, set slightly apart from the others, its headstone barely legible. Eleanor Halloway, 1,740, to 1,760. It sat just over the property line, and the developer wanted it moved. The town council, swayed by promises of jobs, agreed despite protests from the elders. They hired a crew to relocate the grave to the churchyard a mile away. My father was hired to help, and I was roped in to clear brush around the site. The work began on a muggy July morning, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. The crew arrived with shovels and a backhoe, their faces uneasy despite their jokes. I hacked at the weeds, my skin prickling as I neared Eleanor's grave. The headstone was cracked, the name etched deep, as if resisting time. The ground around it was oddly soft, like it had been turned recently, though no one had touched it in years. As I worked, I heard a faint hum, like a voice too low to catch, coming from the earth. The crew chief, a burly man named Tom, laughed off my hesitation. "Just your imagination, kid," he said, but his eyes avoided the grave. They started digging, the backhoe's roar drowning out the hum. I watched from a distance, my stomach twisting. The soil came up dark, almost black, and wet, though it hadn't rained in weeks. When they reached the coffin, the hum stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. The coffin was small, wood-rotted but intact, carved with symbols I didn't recognize as spirals, crosses, lines that seemed to writhe in the light. Tom hesitated, then pried it open. Inside was nothing, no bones, no cloth, just a layer of ash that stirred in the breeze. The crew muttered, crossing themselves, but the job was done. They loaded the coffin into a truck and drove it to the churchyard, where a new plot waited. I stayed behind, staring at the empty hole, feeling like we'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. That night, the house felt different. The air was colder, the shadows sharper. I woke around midnight to a scratching sound, like nails on wood, coming from the walls. I checked my room, the hallway, nothing, but the sound followed me, faint but persistent, like it was inside my head. Downstairs, Grandma was awake, her rosary in hand, her face pale. "You moved her, didn't you?" she whispered. "It was just a job," I said, but my voice shook. She shook her head. "Eleanor wasn't like the others. She was the price." I didn't understand, but her words clung to me. The next day, strange things started happening. The barn door, always latched, swung open overnight. The cows refused to eat, their eyes wild. My father found footprints in the field small, barefoot, leading from the old grave to the house. He blamed vandals, but I saw the fear in his eyes. At night, the scratching grew louder, now joined by a whisper, soft and urgent, saying my name. I went to the town library, a cramped room above the post office, and dug through old records. The Halloways were mentioned often, their wealth tied to the land's unnatural bounty. A journal from 1760, written by a pastor, told of Eleanor's death. She was young, the pastor wrote, but marked by the family's sin. Her grave was set apart, not out of disrespect, but to bind what she held. The words chilled me. What had she held? The whispers grew stronger each night, now a voice, female and mournful, calling from the backyard. I avoided the windows, but one night I couldn't resist. I looked out and saw Hera girl, pale and thin, her dress tattered, standing where her grave had been. Her eyes were empty, but they locked on mine, and the whisper became a scream in my head, "Return me." I told Grandma everything. She didn't scold me, just took my hand and led me to her room where she kept a box of old papers. Inside was a deed, yellowed and brittle, signed by the Halloways. It promised the land's prosperity so long as the seal remains unbroken. Grandma's voice was steady but grave. Eleanor was the seal. Her grave kept something in or out. "What do we do?" I asked. "We put her back," she said. The next day, we went to the churchyard, Grandma clutching a shovel like a weapon. The new grave was pristine, but the ground around it was cracked, as if something had tried to claw its way out. We dug in silence, the air growing colder with each scoop. The coffin was there, still empty, but the ash inside stirred, forming shapes, faces, hands, eyes. Grandma whispered prayers, her hands trembling, and we carried the coffin back to the farm. The crew refused to help, and my father, pale and silent, drove the truck. We placed the coffin in its original hole, covering it with the black soil. Grandma sprinkled salt and herbs, muttering words I didn't understand. The hum returned, softer now, like a sigh. The girl didn't appear again, and the whispers stopped. The barn door stayed shut, the cows calmed, and the footprints faded. But the house never felt the same. Shadows lingered in corners, and the air carried a faint hum like a warning. The developer's project-stalled equipment broke, workers quit, and the land stayed barren. Crow's End went quiet, but I saw the looks the elders gave our farm, a mix of fear and respect. Grandma never spoke of it again, but she kept the deed locked away, a reminder of the price we'd almost paid. I left for college that fall, eager to escape, but every night I check my windows, half expecting to see her Eleanor, standing in the dark, waiting for her grave to be moved again. Because I know now, some things, once disturbed, never truly rest. The Scream from the Heirloom Doll. In the village of Mistvale, where the hills were cloaked in fog and the air always carried a hint of damp earth, our family home stood like a relic from another time. It was a creaky two-story house with narrow windows and a roof that sagged under the weight of countless winters. My mother inherited it from her great-aunt, along with a collection of oddities that filled the attic-old clocks, chipped teacups, and a single porcelain doll that no one ever touched. The doll, with its painted smile and glassy eyes, was the family's heirloom, said to be older than Mistvale itself. I was 17, home for the summer, when I learned why it was called the Screaming Doll. My name is Elise, and I'd always found the doll unsettling. It sat in a locked glass case in the attic, its white dress yellowed with age, its black curls still glossy despite the years. My mother called it a treasure, but she never explained why we kept it locked away. My younger brother, Sam, only 12, was obsessed with it, always begging to see it closer. "It's just a doll," he'd say, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on its too perfect face, like he sensed something I didn't. The trouble started on a rainy August night, the kind where the wind howled and the house groaned like a living thing. I was in my room, sketching, when a scream tore through the house, a high, piercing wail that wasn't human. I dropped my pencil and ran downstairs, heart pounding, expecting to find Sam hurt. He was in the living room, pale but unharmed, staring at the ceiling. "It came from the attic," he whispered. My mother was at work, a night shift at the local diner, so it was just us. I grabbed a flashlight and told Sam to stay put, but he followed, his curiosity stronger than his fear. The attic stairs creaked under our weight, the air growing colder with each step. The glass case was still locked, the doll unchanged, but its eyes seemed to follow us, its smile sharper in the flashlight's beam. The scream came again, softer now, but unmistakable, echoing from the doll itself. I backed away, my skin crawling. Sam reached for the case, but I grabbed his hand. "Don't!" I said, my voice shaking. We locked the attic door and waited for Mom, neither of us sleeping. When she got home, I told her everything. Her face tightened, and she went to the attic alone, emerging with a key she kept hidden in her jewelry box. "It's just the wind," she said, but her hands trembled. The screams continued every night, always around midnight, faint but piercing, like a cry trapped in glass. Sam started sneaking to the attic, drawn to the doll despite my warnings. One night, I caught him with the key, the case open, his fingers inches from the doll's face. "It talks to me," he said, his eyes distant. "It wants to be free." I dragged him out, locking the case and hiding the key. The next day, I went to the village archive, a dusty room in the town hall, to find answers. The librarian, Mrs. Varn, knew every story Mistvale held. I asked about the doll, and her eyes darkened. She pulled out a ledger from the 1800s, its pages brittle with age. The doll, she said, was made by a woman named Clara Hollowell, a toy maker who'd lost her daughter, Lila, to fever. Clara poured her grief into the doll, crafting it in Lila's likeness, but rumors said she wove something else into it, something not of this world. "They say Clara made a pact," Mrs. Varn whispered, "to keep Lila's spirit close. But spirits don't rest easy in porcelain. The doll was locked away after Clara vanished, and every family that owned it heard the screams." "What does it want?" I asked. Mrs. Varn shrugged. "No one knows, but it's tied to the Hallowells and your family's blood." I didn't tell Mom what I'd learned. She'd always dismissed the doll's history, but I saw the fear in her eyes when the screams woke her. The noises grew worse, scratching, whispers, footsteps in the attic when no one was there. Sam grew quieter, his obsession with the doll deepening. One night, I found him sleepwalking, standing before the locked case, muttering words I couldn't understand. I called Mrs. Varn desperate. She came to the house with a bundle of sage and a small iron knife. "The doll's a vessel," she said. "It holds something, maybe Lila, maybe something worse. You need to break the bond." She showed me a ritual. Burn the sage, carve a symbol of release a circle with a slash into the case, and bury the doll far from the house. Mom was skeptical but agreed, too tired to argue. That night, we went to the attic. The air thick with the smell of dust and something sweeter, like rotting flowers. The doll's eyes seemed to glow, its smile mocking. Mrs. Varn lit the sage, the smoke curling toward the ceiling, and carved the symbol into the glass. The scream came again, louder, shaking the walls. Sam lunged for the case, his eyes wild. "She needs me!" he shouted. I pulled him back, my arms aching as he fought. Mrs. Varn opened the case, and the air turned cold. The scream, now a wail that clawed at my mind. She grabbed the doll, wrapping it in cloth, and we ran outside, the rain soaking us. We drove to a field beyond Mistvale, where the earth was soft and untouched. Mrs. Varn dug a hole, muttering prayers, and buried the doll deep, covering it with salt and ash. The screams stopped. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. Sam snapped out of his trance, confused but himself again. Mom burned the glass case in the backyard, the flames hissing in the rain. We never spoke of it, but I saw the relief in her eyes. Months later, I found a scrap of Clara's journal in the attic, hidden in a crack in the floor. It read, "Lila is in the doll, but so is her pain. Forgive me. I burned it, hoping it would end things." The house is quiet now, but sometimes, when the wind howls, I hear a faint cry, like a voice trapped in porcelain, reminding me of the scream we buried but never silenced. The voice behind the empty phone. In the small town of Ashwick, where the streets wound through hills and the nights were heavy with silence, our family home sat on a quiet corner, its walls weathered by decades of rain and wind. It was a modest place, with a sagging porch and a rotary phone in the hallway that hadn't worked since I was a kid. My parents kept it for nostalgia, a relic from my grandfather's time, its black cord frayed but intact. I was 18, back from my first semester at college, when the phone started ringing and the voice on the other end changed everything. My name is Tara, and I'd always loved Ashwick's stillness, the way it felt like time had forgotten us. But that summer, the town felt different, as if the air held its breath. It started on a humid July night, the kind where the stars hid behind a veil of clouds. I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when the old rotary rang a shrill, jarring sound that made me jump. I stared at it, confused. The phone wasn't connected. It hadn't been for years. I picked up the receiver, expecting silence or a dial tone. Instead, there was a voice, soft, female, and trembling. "Tara," it whispered. "Help me." My name, clear as day, sent a chill down my spine. I slammed the receiver down, heart pounding, and checked the cord. It was unplugged, dangling uselessly against the wall. I told myself it was a prank, maybe static from a crossed wire, but the voice lingered, echoing in my head. The next night, it rang again, just past midnight. My parents were asleep, the house dark except for the glow of my laptop. I hesitated, then answered. "Tara," the voice said, clearer now, "I'm trapped." It was desperate, almost pleading, but the line crackled with static, like wind through dry leaves. I asked who it was, but the call cut off, leaving only silence. I checked the phone again, no connection, no power, just a dead relic. I didn't tell my parents. They'd say I was tired, imagining things. But the calls kept coming every night at the same time, always that voice, always my name. Sometimes it whispered fragments, the attic, the key, don't leave me, but never enough to make sense. I started avoiding the hallway, but the ringing pierced through the house, impossible to ignore. My little sister Mia, only 10, heard it too. "Who's calling, Tara?" she asked, her eyes wide. I lied, saying it was a glitch, but she didn't believe me. A week in, I couldn't take it anymore. I searched the house for answers, starting with the attic where the voice had mentioned. It was a dusty maze of boxes and old furniture, the air thick with mildew. I found a trunk under a tarp, its lock rusted but intact. Inside were letters, yellowed and brittle, addressed to my grandfather from a woman named Lila Crane. They were dated 1963, full of love and promises. But the last one was different. "They won't let me go. The phone is my only way out." I took the letters to Mrs. Ellis, the town's unofficial historian, who lived in a cottage stuffed with books and newspaper clippings. She read them, her face paling. "Lila Crane," she said, "was your grandfather's sister. She disappeared in '63, right after their parents died. Some say she ran away, others, something else. The house was hers before it was your grandfather's." "What about the phone?" I asked. Mrs. Ellis frowned. "There were stories. Lila was obsessed with that phone, said it connected her to things beyond. After she vanished, your grandfather swore he heard her voice through it, even when it was unplugged." I went home, my mind racing. That night, the phone rang again. I answered, my hands shaking. "Lila?" I said, testing the name. The voice gasped, then whispered, "You know me. Please, find the key." The line crackled, and I heard something else say, low hum, like voices overlapping, not all of them hers. I hung up, my chest tight, and tore through the attic again. Hidden in a crack in the floor was a small brass key, cold to the touch. I didn't know what it opened, but the trunk seemed likely. I waited until Mia was asleep, then went back to the attic. The key fit perfectly, and the trunk creaked open, revealing a bundle of cloth. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, Lila, her eyes bright but haunted, and a notebook filled with frantic handwriting. It described a ritual, something about bridging worlds through the phone, using it to speak to the dead. The last page read, "They took me, the phone is the door, don't answer." The ringing started again, louder, angrier. I ran downstairs, the notebook clutched to my chest. The voice wasn't Lila's this time, it was deeper, harsher, chanting my name like a curse. I yanked the phone from the wall, its cord snapping, but the ringing didn't stop. It came from everywhere: walls, floors, my own head. Mia woke, screaming, and I grabbed her, locking us in my room. The next day, I took the notebook to Mrs. Ellis. She read it, her hands trembling. "Lila opened something she couldn't close," she said. "The phone's a conduit, tied to her, and whatever took her, you need to sever it." She gave me instructions. Burn the notebook, salt the phone, and bury both far from the house. That night, I did as she said, my parents still at work, unaware. Mia watched, clutching my hand, as I burned the notebook in the backyard, the flames casting shadows that seemed to writhe. I poured salt over the phone, its plastic case oddly warm, and drove to a field outside Ashwick. I buried it deep, the ground swallowing it like a hungry mouth. The ringing stopped. The house felt lighter, the air less heavy. Mia slept through the night for the first time in weeks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. I found a photo of Lila in my room a week later, tucked under my pillow, though I'd never brought it there. I burned it too, whispering an apology to her. Ashwick is quiet now, but I avoid the hallway where the phone once sat. Sometimes in the dead of night, I hear a faint hum, like a voice waiting to be heard. I don't answer. I never will. Because I know now, some calls come from places you can't hang up from. 3 nights in the empty hospital? In the forgotten town of Holleridge, where the wind howled through crumbling streets and the hills cast long shadows, stood the old St. Agnes Hospital. It was a hulking relic of gray stone, its windows boarded, its doors chained since it closed in the 80s after a fire killed half the staff. The locals avoided it, whispering of screams echoing through its halls long after it was abandoned. I was 19, a thrill seeker with a camera and a blog, when I decided to spend 3 nights in St. Agnes for a dare. I thought it'd be an adventure. I was wrong. My name's Riley, and I'd built a small following online by exploring abandoned places, factories, schools, the usual. St. Agnes was my biggest challenge yet, a place even my friend Jake, who joined me on other trips, refused to touch. "That place isn't right," he said, but I laughed it off, packing my sleeping bag, flashlight, and a cheap recorder for ambiance. The plan was simple. Document 3 nights, take some photos, and get out. Hollow Ridge was a ghost town, so no one would bother me. Night 1. I arrived at dusk. The sky bleeding red over the hills, the hospital loomed like a fortress, its silhouette jagged against the horizon. The chain on the main door was rusted, easy to pry open with a crowbar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of antiseptic, like the building hadn't forgotten its past. The lobby was a wreck overturned chairs, peeling paint, a reception desk coated in grime. My footsteps echoed as I set up camp in a corner, my sleeping bag looking pitifully small in the vast space. I explored the first floor, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The halls were lined with gurneys, some with straps dangling like skeletal fingers. In one room, I found patient files scattered on the floor, their pages brittle, names faded. I took photos, the flash making the shadows jump. Around midnight, my recorder picked up a faint hum, like a distant voice coming from the stairwell. I checked, but it was just pipes, or so I told myself. I went to bed uneasy, the hum lingering in my ears. Night 2. I woke to silence, the kind that presses against your chest. My phone showed 3 a.m., but it felt later, like time had slipped. I grabbed my flashlight and explored the second floor, where the fire had hit hardest. The walls were blackened, the air bitter with old smoke. In the surgical wing, I found an operating table, its metal stained with something too dark to be rust. My recorder caught whispers now, Not one voice, but many, overlapping, too faint to make out. I played it back, my skin crawling as I heard my name, Riley, buried in the static. I ran back to the lobby, telling myself it was a trick of the mind. But the shadows seemed wrong, moving when they shouldn't, pooling in corners like ink. I checked my photos from earlier. Most were normal, but one showed a figure in a doorway, tall and thin, its face a blur. I hadn't seen it when I took the shot. I deleted it, my hands shaking, and stayed awake, clutching my crowbar. Night 3. By the third night, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from lack of sleep. The hospital felt alive, its walls creaking, its air heavy with something watching. I decided to leave at dawn, but I wanted one last sweep, this time the basement where the morgue was. The stairs were narrow, the air colder with each step. The morgue was a long room, its steel drawers glinting in my flashlight's beam. One was ajar, and I froze, hearing a scrape from inside, like nails on metal. I backed away, but the whispers returned, louder, chanting my name. My recorder was on, catching every word. "Stay, Riley, stay!" I ran, tripping over debris, and reached the lobby, where my sleeping bag was shredded, its stuffing scattered like snow. The front door, which I'd left propped open, was now shut, the chain back in place. I pried it open, my hands slipping, and stumbled outside, the dawn light blinding. I drove straight to Jake's house, an hour away, and showed him the recordings. His face went pale as he listened to the voices, clear now dozens, all saying my name. "You shouldn't have gone," he said. "He told me what the locals knew but never shared. St. Agnes wasn't just a hospital. It was built on a burial ground, and the fire wasn't an accident, it was a purge meant to seal something in. Those who died didn't leave." I never went back to Hollow Ridge. I deleted my blog, burned the photos, and smashed the recorder. But sometimes, at night, I hear a hum, like the one from that first night, and I feel the hospital's pull, as if it's still calling me to stay. 3 nights were enough to know. Some places don't let you go, even when you leave. Greeted by the dead. In the quiet village of Thornvale, where mist curled through the pines and the river murmured secrets, our family home stood at the edge of an ancient cemetery. It was a modest, ivy-clad house, its windows fogged with age, its walls steeped in the damp chill of the valley. The cemetery, a tangle of weathered headstones and gnarled trees, was older than the village itself, its graves marked by names long forgotten. As a skeptical 16-year-old, I thought the stories about Thornvale's dead were just tales to scare kids. But the summer I came home from boarding school, I learned what it meant to be greeted by those who'd long since passed. My name is Emma, and I'd grown up hearing whispers about the cemetery. The elders said the dead there didn't rest, that they lingered, tied to the land by some unspoken debt. My parents, both accountants, laughed off the tales, but my Aunt Clara, who lived with us, was different. She'd sit on the porch at dusk, staring at the graves, her fingers tracing patterns in the air. "Don't wander there after dark," she'd warn. "They know your name." I ignored her, chalking it up to her eccentricities. But that June, the air felt heavier, the cemetery's shadows sharper. It started on a muggy evening, the sky bruised with clouds. I was in the backyard, sketching the old oak that marked the cemetery's edge, when I heard my name soft, like a breath, but clear, "Emma." I spun around, expecting my brother, Liam, playing a prank. The yard was empty, the cemetery silent, except for the rustle of leaves. I shook it off, blaming the wind, but my skin prickled. That night, I woke to the same voice, louder now, coming from the window overlooking the graves. "Emma," it said, drawn out, almost pleading. I peered out, my breath fogging the glass. The cemetery was dark, but one headstone glowed faintly, its inscription unreadable from a distance. I closed the curtains and didn't sleep, the voice echoing in my head. The next day, I told Liam, who was 14 and fearless. He grinned, sensing an adventure. "Let's check it out," he said, grabbing a flashlight. I hesitated, but followed, not wanting to seem scared. We crept into the cemetery at dusk, the air thick with the scent of moss and decay. The glowing headstone belonged to a woman named Abigail Wren, died 1847, her name carved deep into the stone. The ground around it was soft, like it had been disturbed, and the air felt cold, too cold for summer. As we stood there, the voice came again, "Emma," from nowhere and everywhere. Liam's flashlight flickered and he grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. We ran back to the house, locking the door, but the voice followed, now a chorus, multiple voices whispering my name through the walls. I told Aunt Clara the next morning, expecting her to dismiss it. Instead, she paled, her hands clutching her tea mug. "You heard Abigail," she said. "She's one of the old ones, tied to this place. She knows you because you're here." "What does she want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Clara's eyes were distant. "The dead don't always want. Sometimes they just reach out." She wouldn't say more, but she gave me a charm, a small iron pendant etched with a spiraland, told me to wear it. "It keeps them quiet," she said. I wore it, but the whispers didn't stop. Every night, they grew louder, now joined by footsteps, soft but deliberate, circling the house. Liam heard them too, his bravado fading. One night, he woke me, his face pale. "She's outside my window," he said. I looked, and there she was, a figure, faint and gray, her dress tattered, her face blurred, but her eyes fixed on me. I dragged Liam to the library the next day, a cramped building filled with dusty records. The librarian, Mr. Tate, knew Thornvale's history better than anyone. I asked about Abigail Wren, and he pulled a journal from 1847, its pages brittle. Abigail, it said, was a healer accused of witchcraft after a fever swept the village. They buried her in unhallowed ground outside the churchyard to keep her spirit bound. The journal ended with a warning: she speaks to those who live on her land. That night, the whispers became a scream, sharp and anguished, rattling the windows. I found Clara in the kitchen, clutching her charm, her eyes wild. "She's angry," she said. "The cemetery's shifting. Something's waking them all." "What do we do?" I asked. She handed me a bundle of sage and a vial of salt. "Go to her grave, apologize, give her peace." Liam refused to come, so I went alone, the charm heavy around my neck. The cemetery was alive with shadows, the air humming like a distant storm. Abigail's headstone glowed brighter. The ground around it cracked. I lit the sage, its smoke curling upward, and sprinkled salt over the grave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Rest now." The scream stopped, but the air grew colder, and the figure appeared, closer now, her face almost clear pale, hollow, her eyes bottomless. She reached out, her fingers brushing my charm, and I felt a pull, like she was trying to draw me into the ground. I stumbled back, the sage falling, and ran, the cemetery's hum chasing me. The next day, Clara called a priest, an old man who knew the village's secrets. He blessed the grave, muttering prayers in a language I didn't know. The whispers faded, the figure didn't return, and the cemetery went quiet. But the house never felt the same. Shadows lingered in corners, and the air carried a faint hum, like a voice waiting to speak. We moved that fall, leaving the house to a distant cousin. I still wear the charm, and sometimes, when the night is too still, I hear my name, soft and distant, a greeting from the dead I'll never answer. The figure in the CCTV never seen by human eyes. In the sleepy town of Cresthaven, where streetlights flickered and the nights were thick with quiet, the old warehouse on Mill Street stood like a forgotten giant. Its walls were rusted steel, its windows clouded with grime, and its chain-link fence sagged under years of neglect. Once a hub for shipping, it now sat empty, used only for storage by a local security firm. I was 20, working the night shift as a guard, monitoring the warehouse's CCTV feeds from a cramped office. The job was dull until the figure appeared on the screens, a shadow no human eye could see. My name is Lucas, and I took the job to save for college. The warehouse was equipped with a dozen cameras, their feeds streaming to a bank of monitors in the office. My routine was simple: watch the screens, log any activity, and make rounds every few hours. The place was always empty, the only sounds the hum of the monitors and the occasional creak of settling metal. But the locals had whispers of a presence in the warehouse, something that lingered after a worker vanished in the 90s. I dismissed them as small-town gossip. It started on a chilly September night, the air sharp with the promise of autumn. I was halfway through my shift, sipping stale coffee, when the monitor for camera 7 flickered. The screen showed the warehouse's loading bay, a cavernous space filled with crates. A figure stood there, tall, thin, its edges blurred like a smudged photograph. It moved slowly, weaving between crates, its head tilted as if listening. I blinked, sure it was a glitch, but the figure remained, its form clearer with each step. I checked the other cameras. Nothing. The loading bay was empty on every feed except camera 7. My heart kicked up, but I grabbed my flashlight and radio, figuring it was a trespasser. I made my way to the bay, the warehouse's corridors echoing with my footsteps. The air grew colder as I approached, the smell of rust mixing with something sour, like spoiled milk. The bay was empty, no crates disturbed, no footprints in the dust. I radioed my supervisor, Ellen, who told me to check the footage. Back in the office, the figure was gone from camera 7, the feed now showing an empty bay. I rewound the tape. The figure was there, clear as day, moving with purpose, but when I paused and zoomed, its face was a void, no features, just a blank oval. My skin crawled. I showed Ellen the footage the next day, but she frowned, saying she saw nothing but static. "Old cameras," she said. "They glitch sometimes." But I knew what I'd seen. The figure appeared again the next night, this time on camera 3 in the storage room. It stood by a stack of boxes, motionless, its blank face turned toward the camera. I checked the room myself, nothing. The other guards, Tom and Maria, took shifts with me, but neither saw anything on the monitors, even when I pointed it out. "You're tired, Lucas," Maria said, but her eyes lingered on the screen, uneasy. I started recording the feeds on my phone, capturing the figure each night. It moved differently, sometimes pacing, sometimes standing still, always on one camera at a time. Its presence felt heavier, the air in the office growing thick, the monitors humming louder. One night, camera 9 caught it in the boiler room, its form flickering like a bad signal. I heard a whisper through the static, "Lucas," my name, clear and cold. I yanked the headphones off, my hands shaking. Desperate, I went to the town library, a dusty building run by Mrs. Carver, who knew Cresthaven's history. I showed her my phone recordings, and her face tightened. She pulled a file from the 90s about a worker named Daniel Holt who disappeared in the warehouse. He was a loner, the file said, obsessed with the building's hidden rooms. After he vanished, security footage showed a figure in the halls, but no one saw it in person. The cameras were replaced, the tapes destroyed, and the case closed as an accident. "Some things get trapped," Mrs. Carver said. "The cameras see what we can't. Daniel might still be here, caught in some in-between place." I asked what to do, but she had no answers, just a warning, "Don't follow it." That night, the figure appeared on camera 1 right outside the office door. I locked it, my breath shallow, and watched as it stood there, its blank face filling the screen. The whisper came again, louder, chanting my name. The door rattled, though the camera showed nothing touching it. I called Ellen, who checked the warehouse herself empty. She watched the footage with me, but saw only a blank screen. "Get some rest," she said, but her voice was unsteady. I didn't tell her about the whispers, or the cold that seeped into my bones. On my last shift, I brought salt and a charm from Mrs. Carvera, small iron cross, said to ward off spirits. The figure appeared on all cameras at once, its form clearer, almost solid. The whispers became a chorus, urgent, angry. I sprinkled salt around the office, clutching the cross, and unplugged the monitors. The room went dark, but the whispers didn't stop, now coming from the walls. The door shook violently, and I heard footsteps low, deliberate, circling the office. I quit the next day, leaving Cresthaven for good. I deleted the recordings, but the figure's blank face haunts my dreams. The warehouse is still there, its cameras watching. I don't know if Daniel Holt is trapped, or if something else wears his shape, but I know one thing. Some eyes see more than ours, and some doors, once opened, never close. He hitched a ride in our car. In the rural stretch of Blackthorn County, where the roads twisted through endless fields and the stars burned bright against a velvet sky, our family's old sedan was our lifeline. It was a beat-up thing, its paint chipped, its radio stuck on a crackling country station, but it got us where we needed to go. I was 17, home for the summer from boarding school, when my brother and I took a late-night drive that changed everything. We thought we were alone on that empty road. We were wrong. He hitched a ride in our car. My name is Mia, and my brother Ethan was 15, all gangly limbs and restless energy. Our parents were at a friend's wedding an hour away, so we'd borrowed the car to grab snacks from the gas station in town. The road back was a lonely ribbon of asphalt, flanked by cornfields that whispered in the night breeze. It was past midnight, the air cool through the open windows, when Ethan, sprawled in the passenger seat, pointed to the road ahead. "Someone's there," he said. I slowed the car, my headlights catching a figure by the roadside, a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed too heavy for summer. He stood still, his face shadowed, one hand raised in a half-hearted wave. "Should we stop?" I asked, uneasy. Ethan shrugged, always too curious for his own good. "He looks like he needs help." I pulled over, the gravel crunching under the tires. The man approached, his steps slow, deliberate, up close. His face was pale, his eyes sunken but sharp, like they saw too much. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice low, almost a hum. "Car broke down a mile back. Can you give me a lift to the next town?" Something in his tone made my skin prickle, but Ethan nodded eagerly. "Sure, hop in." I shot him a look, but the man was already climbing into the back seat, the door creaking shut. He smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, like old coins. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but his face was blurred, like a photo out of focus. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, twisting to look at him. "Call me Jonah," he said, his smile thin, "just passing through." I drove, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The radio crackled, spitting static instead of music. Jonah was quiet, but I felt his presence, heavy and cold, like a weight pressing on my chest. Ethan kept chatting, asking where Jonah was from, but his answers were vague around nowhere special. I noticed the car felt sluggish, the engine straining, though the tank was full. Halfway to town, the air grew colder, the windows fogging despite the warm night. Ethan's chatter slowed, his voice faltering. I glanced in the mirror again, and Jonah's eyes met mine, unblinking, too bright in the dark. "You're a kind girl, Mia," he said, though I hadn't told him my name. My hands tightened on the wheel. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He didn't answer, just smiled wider, his teeth glinting. The radio burst into a loud hum, like voices overlapping, and the car swerved, the wheel jerking in my hands. Ethan yelped, grabbing the dashboard. "What's going on?" he shouted. I fought to steady the car, my heart pounding, but the road seemed to twist, the fields closing in. "Stop the car," Jonah said, his voice no longer soft but commanding, like a blade. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. The headlights flickered, and in their beam, I saw the road was empty, no fields, no trees, just a gray void. Jonah leaned forward, his breath cold on my neck. "You shouldn't have stopped," he whispered. Ethan screamed, and I turned to see Jonah's face change, his skin graying, his eyes sinking into black pits. I fumbled for the door, dragging Ethan out with me. We ran, the car's headlights fading behind us, the void swallowing the road. I don't know how long we ran, but we reached a gas station, its neon sign a beacon in the dark. The clerk, an old man named Gus, saw our panic and let us in, locking the door. We told him everything, our words tumbling over each other. Gus's face hardened. "You picked up Jonah," he said, like it was a fact, not a question. He pulled a dusty book from under the counter, its pages filled with newspaper clippings. One from 1974 described a man named Jonah Reed, a drifter who died on that road, hit by a truck. Since then, locals said he hitched rides, appearing to drivers at night, never reaching town. "He's not alive," Gus said, "and he doesn't leave alone." We called our parents, who picked us up, shaken but safe. The car was found the next day, parked neatly by the roadside, its engine dead. Inside, the back seat was covered in dirt, the air thick with that metallic smell. I never drove that road again, but Ethan swore he saw Jonah in the rearview mirror of other cars, waiting. We moved to the city that fall, leaving Blackthorn County behind. But sometimes, at night, I hear a hum like static, and I check my mirrors, half expecting those bright eyes. Jonah's still out there, hitching rides, and I know one thing: some passengers never get out. The guest room never empty. In the heart of a small coastal town, nestled between salt-worn cliffs and the restless sea, stood a house that everyone knew as the Everly Cottage. It was not grand, nor was it particularly old, but it had a reputation that clung to it like the mist that rolled in from the ocean each morning. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The guest room in Everly Cottage, they said, was never empty. The house belonged to Clara Everly, a woman in her late 50s whose warm smile and sharp wit made her a beloved figure in the town. Her hair, streaked with silver, was often tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and her eyes held the kind of depth that suggested she had seen more of life than most. Clara had lived in the cottage her entire life, inheriting it from her mother, who had inherited it from hers. The Everly women, it was said, had a quiet, unexplainable ability to draw people to their doorstep. The guest room was on the second floor, a modest space with a single bed draped in a faded quilt, a wooden chair by the window, and a small desk with a lamp that flickered when the wind howled too fiercely. The room was unremarkable, yet it was the heart of the cottage's mystery. No one could recall a time when it had been unoccupied. Travelers, strangers, and even locals in need of solace found their way to Clara's door, and she never turned them away. Some stayed for a night, others for weeks, but the room was never left vacant for long. The moment one guest left, another would arrive, as if guided by some unseen force. Clara herself never questioned it. She believed the cottage had a soul, one that called to those who needed it most. She had grown up watching her mother tend to the endless stream of visitors, sailors seeking refuge from storms, wanderers with nowhere else to go, or heartbroken souls looking for a place to mend. As a child, Clara would sit at the top of the stairs, listening to the murmur of voices from the guest room, wondering what stories the walls had absorbed. One autumn evening, as the sky burned orange and the air carried the sharp tang of salt, a young man named Elias arrived at the cottage. He was thin, with a face that seemed too young for the weariness in his eyes. His coat was threadbare, and he carried a leather satchel that looked as though it had seen better days. Clara was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, when she heard the knock. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door, her smile as warm as ever. "You must be tired," she said, stepping aside. "Come in. The guest room's ready for you." Elias hesitated, his fingers tightening around the strap of his satchel. "How did you know I needed a place to stay?" Clara chuckled softly. The cottage always knows. He followed her inside, his boots leaving faint traces of mud on the worn wooden floor. The house smelled of rosemary and freshly baked bread, and the warmth of the hearth seemed to wrap around him like a blanket. Clara led him upstairs to the guest room, where the bed was neatly made and a single candle flickered on the desk. "Rest as long as you need," she said. "Supper's in an hour if you're hungry." Alias nodded, too tired to ask questions. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls as if they might speak. He had been running for weeks, though from what, he couldn't quite say. A failed business, a broken engagement, a life that had unraveled faster than he could stitch it back together. He had heard of Everleigh Cottage from a stranger in a tavern 2 towns over who had spoken of it with a kind of awe. "Go there," the man had said. "It's where lost things find their way." That night, Elias slept more deeply than he had in months. The sea roared outside, but the guest room was a cocoon of quiet, its walls holding him in a gentle embrace. When he woke, the candle was still burning, though it should have guttered out hours ago. He dressed and joined Clara downstairs, where she served him eggs and toast with a pot of strong tea. "You look like you've carried a heavy load," she said, sitting across from him. Elias stared into his cup. "I don't know where I'm going anymore." Clara nodded, her eyes kind but piercing. "Most don't when they get here, but the cottage has a way of showing you." Over the next few days, Elias settled into a rhythm. He helped Clara with small chore chopping wood, tending the garden, fixing a loose shutter. In return, she shared stories of the guests who had come before him. A painter who found her muse in the cliffs, a widow who left with a smile after years of grief, a sailor who swore the room had whispered to him in his sleep. Elias listened, half skeptical, half entranced. He began to notice things about the guest room, the way the light seemed to linger longer than it should, the way the air felt heavier, as if saturated with unspoken words. One night, unable to sleep, Elias sat at the desk and opened his satchel. Inside was a notebook, its pages filled with half-finished poems he had written in better times. He hadn't touched it in months, but something about the room urged him to pick up the pen. Words flowed effortlessly, spilling onto the page like water from a spring. By dawn, he had written more than he had in years, each line raw and honest, as if the room had coaxed the truth out of him. Days turned into weeks, and Elias felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. He laughed more, his hands grew steadier, and he started to see the world in colors again. One morning, as he helped Clara hang laundry in the yard, she looked at him with a knowing smile. "You're ready to go, aren't you?" she asked. Elias paused, a clothespin in his hand. "How do you know?" "The cottage told me," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It always does." That evening, Elias packed his satchel, his notebook now brimming with new poems. He stood in the guest room one last time, running his fingers along the edge of the desk. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure to whom or what. As he stepped out into the cool night air, another figure appeared on the path, leading to the cottage, a woman with a suitcase, her face etched with worry. Clara greeted her with the same warmth she had shown Elias, leading her inside without a moment's hesitation. Elias glanced back as he walked away, knowing the guest room would not stay empty for long. Years later, Elias would return to the town, his poems now published, his life rebuilt. He stood outside Everleigh Cottage, watching as Clara welcomed yet another stranger. The guest room's window glowed faintly, a beacon for the lost. He smiled, knowing that whatever magic lived in that room, it was not his to understand, only to be grateful for. And so, the guest room in Everleigh Cottage remained as it always had. Never empty, always waiting, a quiet haven for those who needed it most. Something in Grandma's attic? The summer I turned 12, my parents sent me to stay with Grandma Rose in her old house on the edge of Willow Creek. It was a sprawling, creaky place with sagging shutters and a wraparound porch that groaned underfoot. The town itself was small, tucked into a valley where the air always smelled of pine and damp earth. I wasn't thrilled about spending 2 months away from my friends, but Grandma's house had a kind of magic that city kids like me couldn't resist, especially the attic. Grandma Rose was a wiry woman with a crown of white curls and eyes that sparkled like she knew secrets the rest of the world had forgotten. She wore aprons with faded floral patterns and always had a kettle whistling on the stove. Her house was a museum of oddities: glass jars filled with buttons, a grandfather clock that chimed at random, and shelves crammed with books that smelled of mildew. But the attic was the real mystery. Grandma called it the memory room, and she rarely went up there. When I asked why, she'd just smile and say, "Some things are better left to whisper on their own." The attic door was at the end of the upstairs hallway, a narrow slab of wood with a rusty latch. It was always locked, but the key hung on a nail nearby, as if daring someone to use it. On my third day at the house, boredom got the better of me. Grandma was in the garden, humming to her roses, so I grabbed the key and crept toward the door. The latch gave way with a reluctant squeak, and a gust of cool, musty air hit my face. A wooden staircase stretched into the shadows above, each step sagging under my weight as I climbed. The attic was a maze of forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that slipped through a cracked window. There were trunks with broken locks, a dressmaker's dummy draped in cobwebs, and stacks of yellowed newspapers tied with twine. An old rocking chair sat in one corner, its wood carved with strange, swirling patterns that made my eyes hurt if I stared too long. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. I poked around, careful not to sneeze and give myself away. In one trunk, I found a photo album with black and white pictures of people I didn't recognize as stern-faced women in long dresses, men with slicked back hair and suspenders. Another held a collection of glass marbles, their colors glowing faintly in the dim light, but it was the wooden box under the window that stopped me cold. It was small, no bigger than a shoebox, with a lid carved with the same swirling patterns as the rocking chair. There was no lock, but the lid felt heavy, like it didn't want to be opened. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the wood. The attic was quiet, but I could have sworn I heard a faint hum, like a voice too soft to make out. My heart thumped, but curiosity won out. I lifted the lid. Inside was a single object, a brass pocket watch, its face cracked and its hands frozen at 3:17. It was tarnished, but the engravings on the case were still sharp vines and leaves curling around a single word: Eterna. I picked it up, expecting it to be cold, but it was warm, almost hot, against my palm. The moment I touched it, the humming grew louder, vibrating through my chest. The attic seemed to shift, the shadows stretching and curling like smoke. I dropped the watch back into the box and slammed the lid shut. The humming stopped, but my ears were ringing. I backed away, tripping over a crate and landing hard on the floor. The rocking chair creaked, though there was no breeze. I scrambled to my feet and bolted down the stairs, locking the door behind me. When Grandma asked why I looked so pale at dinner, I mumbled something about a spider and changed the subject. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was alive with noisy squeaks, whispers, the faint tick of a clock that shouldn't be ticking. I kept thinking about the watch and that word, Eterna. It sounded like eternal, and the thought made my skin crawl. What was it doing up there, hidden in a box that felt like it didn't belong to this world? The next day, I tried to stay busy. I helped Grandma bake bread, weeded the garden, and even read one of her dusty novels. But the attic kept pulling at me, like a song I couldn't get out of my head. By afternoon, I was back at the door, key in hand. I told myself I'd just look at the watch again, maybe take it downstairs to show Grandma, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The attic felt different, this time colder, heavier. The rocking chair was closer to the window than I remembered, its carvings seeming to pulse in the light. I went straight to the box and opened it. The watch was still there, its hands still stuck at 3:17. I picked it up and the humming started again, louder now, like a chorus of voices overlapping. The air shimmered, and for a moment I saw something, a flicker of movement in the shadows. a figure that wasn't quite there. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. No one answered, but the humming grew into words, faint and garbled, like a radio tuned between stations. I caught fragments time, stay, always. My hands trembled, but I couldn't put the watch down. The attic seemed to close in, the walls bending inward. Then, as suddenly as it started, the humming stopped. The watch went cold, and the shadows snapped back into place. I shoved the watch into my pocket and ran downstairs, locking the door again. I found Grandma in the kitchen, peeling apples. "What's this?" I blurted, holding out the watch. Her face changed, not angry, but sad, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She set the knife down and took the watch, turning it over in her hands. "Where did you find it?" "In the attic, in a box." She sighed, her shoulders sagging. "This belonged to your great-grandfather Elias. He was different. He believed time wasn't just something you lived through, it was something you could hold, bend, even break. This watch was his obsession." "What does Eterna mean?" I asked. "It's his promise," she said softly. "He swore he'd never leave us. Not really. After he died, strange things happened. Clocks stopped. Shadows moved. I hid the watch away, hoping it would quiet him." "Quiet him?" I echoed. Grandma looked at me, her eyes steady. "Some people don't let go, child, not even when they're gone. The rest of the summer, I stayed out of the attic." Grandma kept the watch in her room, locked the attic door for good, but I couldn't shake the attic. At night, I'd hear faint creaks, like footsteps overhead, or a soft ticking that seemed to come from the watch itself anywhere. When my parents came to pick me up, I was ready to leave, but part of me felt like I'd left something behind, not just the watch, but in the attic itself. Years later, after Grandma passed, I inherited the house. I went up to the attic one last time. The attic was empty now, cleared out by movers, but the rocking chair was still sat there, its carvings untouched by time. As I turned to leave, I heard Ita faint hum, like a whisper of something eternal, waiting in the dark. It wasn't me who came home late that night. In the quiet suburb of Maple Grove, where streetlights flickered and the nights were thick with silence, my family's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was a two-story home, unremarkable except for the ivy that clung to its brick walls and the creaky front gate that announced every visitor. I was 17, a senior in high school, and life was a predictable rhythm of classes, soccer practice, and late-night study sessions. But that autumn, something shifted, and it began with the night I swore I wasn't the one who came home late. It was a Friday, just past midnight. I'd been at a friend's house, cramming for a chemistry test, and got home around 10. My parents were strict about curfew, so I made sure to lock the door and head straight to bed. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the backyard, where a single oak tree cast jagged shadows across the lawn. I fell asleep to the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of the front gate creaking. It was a sharp, unmistakable screech that cut through the stillness. My first thought was that Dad had forgotten to lock it again and the wind was pushing it open. But then I heard footsteps low, deliberate, crunching on the gravel path. My heart kicked up a notch. I slipped out of bed and peered through the window, expecting to see a stray cat or maybe a neighbor's dog. The backyard was empty, but the gate was swinging slightly as if someone had just passed through. I crept downstairs, avoiding the squeaky third step. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The front door was still locked, the deadbolt in place. I checked the kitchen, the back door, everything was secure. Shaking off the unease, I told myself it was nothing and went back to bed. The next morning, Mom was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "You were late last night, Ethan," she said, not looking up. "I heard you come in after midnight." I froze, cereal spoon halfway to my mouth. "What? I was home by 10. You saw me." She frowned, setting her phone down. I heard the gate and footsteps around too. Your father was already asleep, and it wasn't me. Maybe it was a raccoon, I said, though the words felt hollow. The footsteps had been too heavy, too human. Dad chimed in from the couch, where he was reading the paper. You sure you didn't sneak out? Wouldn't be the first time a teenager pulled that stunt. I didn't, I said, sharper than I meant to. I was in bed. They exchanged a look, the kind parents give when they think you're hiding something. But I wasn't. I knew what I'd heard, and it wasn't me. That night, I stayed up, phone in hand, flashlight app ready. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of settling wood. At 1:47 a.m., it happened again. The gate screeched, followed by those same heavy footsteps. I bolted to the window, heart pounding. The gate was open, swaying slightly, but no one was there. The gravel path glistened under the moonlight, undisturbed. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and tiptoed downstairs, checking every lock. Nothing was out of place. This went on for a week. Every night, between 1:30 and 2 a.m., the gate would creak and footsteps would echo. Sometimes they stopped at the front door. Other times they circled the house, pausing under my window. I started sleeping with the bat beside my bed, my nerves fraying with each sleepless night. My parents didn't hear it again, which made it worse. They thought I was stressed, maybe imagining things. But I wasn't. I couldn't be. On the 8th night, I decided to wait outside. I told Mom I was studying late at the library, but instead I hid behind the oak tree, bundled in a jacket against the October chill. The air was sharp, smelling of damp leaves and earth. I crouched low, eyes fixed on the gate, my phone set to record in case something happened. At 1:53 a.m. The gate creaked open. I held my breath, gripping the bat. The footsteps came, slow and steady, crunching on the gravel. I peered around the tree, expecting to see a figure, a burglar, a prankster, someone, but the path was empty. The gate swung gently, and the footsteps kept coming, moving toward the front door. My skin prickled. I stepped out, bat raised, and whispered, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. The air grew heavy, like a storm was about to break. Then, from the shadows near the porch, a voice answered a low, raspy murmur that wasn't quite words. It sounded like my name, stretched and distorted, like a recording played too slow. I stumbled back, my phone slipping from my hand. The screen cracked as it hit the ground, but I didn't care. I ran inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep until dawn. The next day, I told my best friend Lucas everything. He was the kind of guy who believed in ghosts and UFOs, so I figured he'd at least listen. We sat in his garage, surrounded by his dad's old tools, and I showed him the cracked phone. The video was corrupted, just static and a faint hum that made my stomach twist. "We need to figure out what's going on," Lucas said, his eyes wide. "What if it's like a doppelganger or something?" I laughed it off, but the idea stuck. That afternoon, we dug into the history of the house. The library had a dusty archive of town records, and after an hour of flipping through microfiche, we found something. In 1987, a man named Daniel Harper had lived in our house. He'd been a recluse, rarely seen except at night, when neighbors reported hearing his gate creak and his footsteps circling the property. One night, he vanished. No body, no note, just an empty house and a gate left swinging. Lucas was convinced Daniel's ghost was haunting me. I wasn't so sure, but I couldn't explain the footsteps or the voice. That night, we set up a plan. Lucas hid in the backyard with a flashlight while I waited inside, bat in hand. At 1:49 a.m., the gate creaked. Lucas texted me, "Nothing's there," but I heard the footsteps, louder than ever, moving toward the front door. Then, a knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Lucas texted again, "No one's at the door," but the knocking continued, steady and insistent. I forced myself to open the door, bat raised, ready to swing. The porch was empty, the gate still, but the air felt wrong, like it was pressing against me, heavy with the smell of old wood and something metallic. "Daniel?" I whispered, feeling ridiculous but desperate. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from inside the house, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming down the stairs. I slammed the door shut and ran to Lucas, who was still in the backyard, pale as a sheet. "I heard it too," he whispered. "Inside." We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my parents everything. To my surprise, Dad didn't dismiss it. He said he'd heard stories about the house when they bought it, whispers of a man who never really left. They called a local historian, Mrs. Callahan, who knew the town's secrets better than anyone. Mrs. Callahan came over that afternoon, her arms full of old journals. She confirmed Daniel Harper's story, adding that he'd been obsessed with the house, believing it held a piece of him he couldn't leave behind. Some people, she said, tie themselves to a place so tightly they can't let go, even in death. She suggested we leave in a faringa, small gesture to acknowledge Daniel's presence. That night, we placed a candle and a handwritten note on the porch. "Daniel, this isn't your home anymore. Rest now." I don't know if I believed it would work, but at 1:30 a.m., the gate stayed silent. No footsteps, no knocking, just the quiet hum of the night. We never heard the footsteps again. The gate still creaks sometimes, but it's just the wind. At least, that's what I tell myself. But every now and then, when I'm home alone, I catch myself listening, wondering if it really was me who came home late that night or if something else did. The midnight guest from the empty house. The village of Eldwood was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Tucked between rolling hills and a sluggish river, it was a cluster of stone cottages and narrow lanes where everyone knew everyone else's business. My family's house sat on the outskirts, a sturdy two-story with ivy-covered walls and a garden that my mother tended obsessively. Across the lane stood the empty house, number 17, a sagging relic with boarded windows and a door that hadn't opened in years. The locals called it cursed, though no one could agree on why. All I knew was that it gave me the creeps, especially at night when its shadowed outline seemed to loom larger than it should. I was 16, stuck in Eldwood for the summer while my friends were off on beach trips or city adventures. My only company was my younger brother, Tim, who was 10 and far too curious for his own good. Our parents worked late at the local clinic, so most evenings it was just the two of us, eating microwave dinners and arguing over the TV remote. The empty house was a constant presence, its dark windows staring across the lane like unblinking eyes. Tim loved making up stories about it ghosts, monsters, secret societies. I'd roll my eyes and tell him to grow up, but secretly I avoided looking at number 17 after dark. It started on a muggy July night, the kind where the air clung to your skin like damp cloth. Tim was asleep, sprawled across the couch with a comic book on his chest. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when I heard Ida knock at the front door, sharp and deliberate. It was 11:58 p.m., far too late for visitors. My first thought was that Mom or Dad had forgotten their keys, but their car wasn't in the driveway. I hesitated, my stomach twisting, then crept to the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there. The porch was empty, the lane bathed in the dim glow of a single streetlight. Number 17 stood silent across the way, its boarded windows like voids. I opened the door a crack, just to be sure. The night was still, not even a breeze to rustle the leaves. I locked the door and told myself it was a prank, maybe some kids from the village. But as I turned away, the knock came again, 3 slow, heavy thumps. This time, I flung the door open, ready to yell. The porch was still empty, but something caught my eye, a faint flicker of light in one of number 17's upstairs windows. It was gone in an instant, so quick I thought I'd imagined it. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing, and checked every lock in the house. Tim woke up, bleary-eyed, asking what was wrong. I told him it was nothing, but I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I kept watch. Tim was glued to some cartoon, oblivious to my nerves, at exactly 11. 5:58 p.m., the knock came again. I rushed to the door, phone in hand, recording. Nothing. No one on the porch, no sound except the faint hum of crickets. But when I played back the video, there was a noisy, low, raspy whisper like someone saying my name, Lila. I deleted the video, my hands shaking, and told Tim to stay upstairs. The knocks continued every night, always at 11. 58, always 3 thumps. I stopped opening the door, but the sound burrowed into my dreams. Tim started noticing my jumpiness and pestered me until I told him about the knocks. His eyes lit up, like this was the adventure he'd been waiting for. "It's the empty house," he said, grinning. "Someone's living there, and they want to talk to us." "No one lives there," I snapped. "It's been empty since before we were born." "Then let's find out," he said, already halfway to the door. I grabbed him before he could do anything stupid, but his words stuck with me. The next day, I went to the village library, a cramped building that smelled of old paper and dust. Mrs. Paper and Dust. Harrow, the librarian, was ancient, with a memory sharper than anyone's. I asked her about number 17. She pursed her lips, then pulled out a ledger from the 1970s. "Number 17 belonged to Margaret Wren," she said. "Lived there alone after her husband died in the war. She was odd-kept to herself, never left the house after dark. One night, in 74, she vanished. No trace, no note. The house has been empty since." "What do people say happened?" I asked. Mrs. Harrow leaned closer, her voice low. "Some say she made a deal with something she shouldn't have, something that didn't let her leave." I laughed it off, but her words clung to me like fog. That night, Tim begged to stay up and catch the ghost. I let him, mostly because I didn't want to be alone. We sat in the living room, lights dim, watching the clock. At 11:58, the knock came. Tim grabbed my hand, his excitement turning to fear. This time, the doorknob rattled like someone was testing it. I pulled Tim behind the couch, my pulse hammering. The rattling stopped, but then we heard footsteps low, heavy, circling the house. Tim whispered, "It's coming from number 17. I shushed him, but he was right. The footsteps sounded like they were crossing the lane, moving toward us. I grabbed a flashlight and, against every instinct, opened the back door. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on number 17. For a split second, I saw a figure, a woman, tall and thin, her face hidden in shadow standing in the upstairs window. Then the light flickered, and she was gone. I slammed the door, my breath coming in gasps. Tim was crying, and I wasn't much better. We stayed up until Mom and Dad got home, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. They'd think we were crazy. The next day, Tim and I made a plan. We'd sneak into number 17 and figure out what was going on. It was a terrible idea, but the knocks were wearing me down and I needed answers. We waited until dusk, when the village felt deserted. Number 17's front door was boarded shut, but a basement window was loose. We pried it open and crawled inside, the air thick with mold and something sweeter, like old flowers. The house was a wreck-peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and a staircase that groaned under our weight. We crept upstairs, flashlights shaking in our hands. In the upstairs hallway, we found a door that wasn't boarded. It opened to a small room, empty except for a single chair and a cracked mirror on the wall. The mirror was strange, its surface cloudy, like it was holding smoke. As we stared, the air grew cold and the mirror rippled. A face appeared, not ours, but a woman's, pale and sharp-featured, her eyes locked on mine. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, but it felt like a warning. Tim screamed, and we ran, stumbling down the stairs and out through the basement. We didn't stop until we were back in our house, doors locked, lights blazing. The knocks didn't come that night, but I couldn't shake the woman's face. The next day, I told Mrs. Harrow everything. She didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, she gave me a small iron key, cold to the touch. "Margaret left this with my mother," she said. "Said it was for the house to keep things locked away. Bury it by the gate. It might help." That night, Tim and I buried the key under the front gate of number 17, whispering an apology to whoever was listening. The knocks never came again. Number 17 stayed silent, its windows dark. But sometimes, when I pass by, I feel eyes on me, and I wonder if Margaret Wren is still waiting, a midnight guest who never truly left. One house, two worlds. In the quiet town of Haverford, where the streets were lined with oak trees and the days passed with predictable calm, stood a house that didn't quite belong. Number 42, Willow Lane was a modest Victorian, its paint peeling like old skin, its windows reflecting the world in a way that seemed just a touch too sharp. The locals rarely spoke of it, but when they did, it was with a glance over their shoulder, as if the house itself might be listening. For me, Anna, a 19-year-old college freshman home for the summer, it was just the place I'd grown up in. Or so I thought until the night I discovered it held two worlds. My parents had bought the house before I was born, drawn to its charm and suspiciously low price. It had squeaky floors, doors that stuck, a faint hum in the walls that Mom blamed on old pipes. I never questioned it, not even when I was a kid, and swore I heard whispers in my closet. But that summer, with Dad away on business and Mom working night shifts at the hospital, the house felt different. Empty, yet not. It started on a Thursday, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with a book, when I heard a thud from upstairs. Not the usual settling of wood, but a sharp, deliberate sound, like something heavy falling. I set my book down, heart ticking faster, and climbed the stairs. The noise had come from the guest room, a space we rarely used, its door always closed. I turned the knob, expecting it to stick as usual, but it swung open easily, revealing a room that wasn't ours. The guest room I knew had a single bed, a dusty dresser, and faded wallpaper. This room was vibrant walls, painted a deep crimson, a four-poster bed draped in silk, and a chandelier casting prisms of light across the floor. The air smelled of jasmine, not the musty scent I expected. I stepped inside, my sneakers sinking into a plush rug that hadn't been there yesterday. A mirror hung on the far wall, its frame carved with intricate vines. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. My eyes looked older, my hair longer, as if I were seeing a version of myself from another life. I backed out, slamming the door shut. My pulse raced as I checked the rest of the house, half expecting it to have changed too. But the kitchen, the hallway, my bedroom, they were all the same. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of exhaustion, but when I opened the guest room door again, the crimson room was gone. It was just the old guest room, dusty and familiar. The next day, I couldn't focus. I scoured the house for clues, checking the attic, the basement, even the crawl space under the stairs. Nothing. Mom noticed my distraction at dinner and asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about stress and didn't mention the room. How could I? It sounded insane. That night, I waited until midnight, then crept to the guest room. The door opened to the crimson room again, unchanged from the night before. I stepped inside, the jasmine scent stronger now. The mirror drew me in, my reflection shifting subtly now. I wore a dress I'd never owned, my face etched with a sadness I didn't feel. I reached out, and my reflection mirrored me, but its fingers lingered a moment too long. A voice, soft and melodic, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, heart in my throat, and the door slammed shut behind me. When I reopened it, the guest room was normal again. I didn't sleep, my mind spinning with questions. Was I losing it? Or was the house hiding something? The next morning, I went to the town library, a squat building crammed with yellowed records. Mrs. Lyle, the librarian, was a family friend who'd known my parents since they moved to Haverford. I asked about number 42, keeping my story vague. She raised an eyebrow but pulled out a file on the house's history. "Built in 1883, she said, flipping through pages, belonged to a woman named Eliza Marrow. She was a recluse, rumored to be a bit eccentric. They say she believed the house sat on a seam between worlds, a place where realities overlapped. She disappeared in 1901, and the house changed hands a dozen times since. A seam between worlds? I asked, my mouth dry. Mrs. Lyle shrugged. Just stories. People love a mystery. I didn't tell her about the Crimson Room, but Eliza's story gnawed at me. That night, I went back to the guest room armed with a flashlight and my phone. The Crimson Room appeared again, but this time, the mirror showed something new, a woman who wasn't me, with dark hair and pale skin, her eyes pleading. She pressed her hand against the glass, and I felt a pull, like the air was tugging me forward. I touched the mirror, and the world shifted. I was standing in the same room, but different. The chandelier was gone, replaced by gas lamps. The windows showed a night sky with too many stars, and the air carried a faint hum like a distant choir. The woman from the mirror stood before me. Real now, her dress old-fashioned, her voice trembling. "You're from the other side," she said. "You have to leave before it binds you." "Who are you?" I asked. "Eliza," she said. "This house, it's a bridge. 2 worlds, 1 place. I tried to cross, and now I'm trapped." She explained in hushed tones. The house existed in 2 realities, its walls thin where they met. She'd found the seam a century ago, experimenting with mirrors and rituals, hoping to glimpse another world. But she'd crossed too far, and the house wouldn't let her go. Now it was reaching for me. "How do I stop it?" I asked. "Break the mirror," she said. "It's the anchor." I hesitated, glancing at the mirror. My reflection was back, but it flickered between me and Eliza. The hum grew louder, the room vibrating. I grabbed a candlestick from the bed and smashed the mirror. Glass shattered, and the air screamed at us, sound that wasn't sound, but pressure, like the world snapping shut. I fell to my knees, and when I looked up, I was back in the dusty guest room, shards of an ordinary mirror at my feet. The house was quiet after that. The guest room stayed normal, its walls dull and lifeless. I swept up the glass, my hands shaking, and told no one. Mom noticed the broken mirror, but assumed I'd been clumsy. I let her think that. Weeks later, I found a journal in the attic, its pages brittle and signed by Eliza Marrow. It described the house, the seam, her attempts to cross. The last entry read, "The mirror is the key, but it's also the cage. If you find this, don't look too long." I burned the journal in the backyard, the smoke curling into the night. Number 42 Willow Lane was just a house now, or so I hoped. But sometimes, when I pass the guest room, I feel a hum in the walls, faint but persistent, reminding me that some doors, once opened, never fully close. The offering behind the kitchen. In the village of Thornwick, where mist clung to the hills and the river whispered secrets, our family home stood at the edge of a dense forest. It was a squat, stone-walled house, its roof sagging under the weight of years. The kitchen was its heart, always warm from the old stove where my mother baked bread and simmered stews. But behind the kitchen, hidden by a tangle of brambles, was a patch of earth no one spoke off, a place the villagers called the offering ground. I was 15 when I learned why. My name is Lila, and I'd grown up in that house, used to its quirks. The creaky stairs, the drafty windows, the faint smell of smoke that lingered no matter how much we scrubbed. My parents were practical people, dismissive of the village's superstitions, but my grandmother, who lived with us, was different. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, always seemed to see beyond the world. She'd warned me to stay away from the brambles behind the kitchen, saying only, "Some things are best left alone." One October evening, with the sky bruised purple and the air sharp with frost, I was washing dishes when I heard a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like a branch against a window, but steady, deliberate. It came from behind the kitchen, where the back door led to the brambles. I dried my hands and peered out the window, expecting to see a stray animal. The yard was empty, the brambles swaying in the windless night. The tapping grew louder, insistent, like a heartbeat in the earth. I opened the back door, the cold biting my skin. The sound stopped, but the air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm. I stepped outside, my sneakers crunching on the gravel, and pushed through the brambles. They scratched my arms, but I kept going until I reached a small Claringa circle of bare dirt, unnaturally smooth, surrounded by thorns. In the center was a stone, flat and gray, stained with something dark. The tapping started again, coming from beneath it. I ran back inside, heart pounding, and found Grandma in her rocking chair knitting. "What's behind the kitchen?" I asked, my voice shaking. Her needles paused, and she fixed me with a look that made my stomach drop. "You went to the clearing, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to lie. She sighed, setting her knitting aside. "Sit down, Lila. It's time you knew." She told me a story older than the house itself. Long ago, Thornwick was plagued by misfortune. Crops failed, children sickened, the river ran dry. The villagers believed the forest demanded a price for their survival, a balance to keep its spirits appeased. They chose a spot behind our house, then just a hut, to leave offerings, grain, wine, sometimes blood. The misfortune stopped, but the offerings continued, a silent pact passed down through generations. Our family, the keepers of the house, were tasked with maintaining it. "What kind of offerings?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Small things mostly," she said, "but sometimes, in bad years, something more." Her voice dropped. "The last was before you were born. A lamb." I wanted to laugh it off, call it a fairy tale, but the tapping echoed in my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound returned, louder, now joined by a faint hum, like voices too soft to understand. I crept downstairs, avoiding my parents' room, and found Grandma at the kitchen table, a knife and a bowl of herbs in front of her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "It's calling," she said. "The forest knows you've seen the stone." "What does it want?" I whispered. She didn't answer, just handed me a candle and told me to follow her. We went to the clearing, the brambles parting as if they knew her. She knelt by the stone, muttering words I didn't understand, and sprinkled the herbs over it. The tapping stopped, but the air grew colder, the hum sharper. I saw something in the shadows, a shape, tall and thin, its edges blurring like smoke. It didn't move, but I felt its eyes on me. Grandma cut her palm, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the stone. The shape vanished, and the air lightened. "It's enough for now," she said, wrapping her hand. "But it'll call again." I didn't sleep for days, haunted by the shape and the stone. I started noticing thing scratches on the back door, dirt on the kitchen floor that hadn't been there before, a faint smell of decay. My parents brushed off my questions, but Grandma's eyes followed me, heavy with unspoken warnings. One night, the tapping became a pounding, shaking the walls. I found Grandma in the clearing, her face pale, a dead sparrow in her hands. "It's not enough anymore," she said. "It wants something living." I froze. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer, just buried the bird by the stone. The pounding stopped, but I felt marked, like the forest had seen me and wouldn't forget. The next day, I went to the village archives, a dusty room in the town hall. Old records mentioned the clearing, calling it the forest's mouth. Entries from the 1800s described offerings escalating in lean year's chickens, goats once a dog. A single line, dated 1892, chilled me. The forest took a child, and the harvest returned. I confronted Grandma that night. "Is it true? Did they give people?" She nodded, her face crumpling. "Only once. We swore it would never happen again." "Then why is it still calling?" I shouted. "Because the forest remembers," she said, "and it's hungry." I stopped going near the kitchen after that. I begged my parents to move, but they laughed, thinking I was stressed about college applications. The tapping grew louder each night, now joined by scratches like nails on wood. One night, I woke to find the back door open, the brambles parted, and the stone gleaming under the moonlight. The shape was there, closer now, its form almost human but wrong, its limbs too long, its face a blur. Grandma was in the clearing, holding a knife, her eyes wild. "It wants you, Lila," she whispered, "because you saw it." I ran, locking myself in my room, but the tapping followed, now inside the house. I called Mom, sobbing, and she rushed home. By morning, Grandma was gone. We found her shawl by the stone, nothing else. The tapping stopped, and the forest went silent. We moved a month later, leaving the house to rot. The village never spoke of Grandma's disappearance, but I saw the way they looked at me, like I'd escaped something they all feared. I don't know if the forest took her or if she gave herself to protect me. But sometimes, in my new apartment, I hear a faint tap at night and I smell brambles, sharp and bitter, reminding me of the offering behind the kitchen. Never open your eyes when enchanted. In the village of Duskbloom, nestled deep in a valley where the sun seemed to linger just a moment too long, stories of enchantment were as common as the mist that rolled in each evening. The elders spoke of spirits and spells, of promises made in the dark that bound the unwary. As a skeptical 18-year-old, I dismissed these tales as folklore meant to scare children into obedience. But the summer I stayed with my aunt in Duskbloom, I learned the hard way why they warned, never open your eyes when enchanted. My Aunt Mira lived in a cottage at the edge of the village, its walls covered in ivy that seemed to pulse with life. She was a herbalist, her shelves lined with jars of dried leaves and roots, her hands always stained with earth. Mira was kind but cryptic, her warnings laced with riddles. "Keep your eyes sharp, Nora," she'd say, "but close them tight when the air feels wrong." I'd nod, humoring her, unaware of what she meant. It began on a humid July night, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and something sharper, like burnt sugar. I was restless, unable to sleep, so I slipped outside to sit on the porch. The village was quiet, the only sound, the soft rustle of leaves from the forest beyond. As I gazed at the stars, a melody drifted from the trees, faint at first, like a lullaby, then stronger, weaving through my thoughts. It was beautiful, haunting, and it pulled at me, urging me to follow. I stood, my bare feet cool against the grass, and walked toward the forest. The melody grew clearer, a voice now, singing words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. The air shifted, heavier, sweeter, and my head felt light like I was floating. Somewhere deep inside, a warning stirred Mira's words about closing my eyes, but the song drowned it out. I stepped into the forest, the trees closing around me like a curtain. The path was narrow, lit by a strange glow that didn't come from the moon. The voice led me deeper, its notes wrapping around my heart. I don't know how long I walked before I reached a clearing where a figure stood, a woman, or something like one. Her hair was long, shimmering like liquid silver, her eyes hidden in shadow. She wore a dress that moved like mist, and her smile was both kind and sharp. The song came from her, and it held me in place, my limbs heavy, my thoughts slow. "You're lovely," she said, her voice the melody itself. "Stay with me, see my world." I wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but my tongue was leaden. Her hand reached out, cool fingers brushing my cheek, and the world tilted. Colors bled into each other, the trees bending into impossible shapes. I felt myself slipping, my will dissolving into her song. Then Mira's warning cut through the fog. "Close them tight when the air feels wrong." I squeezed my eyes shut, the spell's pull weakening slightly. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Open your eyes, child. See what I offer." I shook my head, eyes clamped shut, my heart pounding. The air grew colder, the sweetness turning sour. Her voice sharpened, the melody twisting into something harsh. "Look at me." she hissed, her breath hot against my face. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, but kept my eyes closed. Images flashed in my mind, dancing under starlight, a feast of glittering fruit, a world where I was never alone, but beneath it, I sensed a hunger, a void that would swallow me whole. I whispered, "No," my voice trembling but firm. The ground shook, and the woman screamed a sound that wasn't human, tearing at my ears. I ran, eyes still shut, guided by instinct and the faint sound of the river. Thorns scratched my arms, branches snagged my hair, but I didn't stop. The scream faded, replaced by the rush of water. I collapsed on the riverbank, gasping, and only then dared to open my eyes. The forest was ordinary again, the glow gone, the air just air. I staggered back to the cottage, the sky lightening with dawn. Mira was on the porch, her face pale but unsurprised. She pulled me inside, locking the door, and made me drink a bitter tea that burned my throat. "You met her," she said, not a question. "The Lady of the Wood." "Who is she?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Mira sighed, setting the kettle on the stove. "A spirit? Older than Duskbloom? She lures the lonely, the curious, promising eternity in her world, but it's a lie. Those who go with her never return, not as themselves." "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, anger mixing with fear. "I tried," she said softly, "but some lessons must be felt." She explained the rules of enchantment. Never follow a voice that feels too perfect. Never eat or drink in the spirit's realm, and never ever open your eyes when the spell takes hold. "Your eyes are the gate," she said. "Once she has them, she has you." I didn't sleep for days, jumping at every sound, expecting the melody to return. Mira gave me a charma braided cord of herbs and Ironto wear around my wrist. "It'll dull her call," she said, but her eyes were worried. The village felt different now, its beauty laced with menace. I noticed things I'd missed before. Scratches on the cottage's door, a faint hum in the air at dusk, neighbors who avoided the forest's edge. One night, a week later, the melody came again, softer but unmistakable. I was in my room, the charm tight on my wrist, and I clamped my eyes shut, reciting Mira's rules like a prayer. The song pressed against my ears, promising peace, love, a world without pain. I felt the urge to run to it, to see the lady's face, but I gripped the charm, its heat grounding me. The melody faded, and I stayed put, safe but shaken. The next day, I went to the village elder, Mr. Thorn, who'd lived in Duskbloom all his 80 years. He listened to my story in his cluttered study, his face grim. "She's been here since the valley was young," he said. "We leave offerings flowers, bread to keep her quiet, but she still hunts. You're marked now. She'll try again." "Is there a way to stop her?" I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a leather-bound book from his shelf, its pages brittle. "There's a ritual, but it's risky. You'd need to draw her out, and burn her anchor something she's tied to, like a tree or stone, but if you fail, she'll take you." I didn't tell Mira about the ritual. I knew she'd lock me in the cottage if I tried. Instead, I waited, watching the forest, memorizing its paths. On the last night of summer, the melody returned, stronger than ever. I slipped out, the charm in one hand, a lighter, and a bundle of sage in the other. The forest glowed, the air thick with her spell. I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on the ground, and followed the song to the clearing. She was there, her form shimmering, her voice a blade of longing. "Look at me," she said, her words honey and poison. I didn't. Instead, lighting the sage and tossing it at her feet, the smoke curled upward, and she shrieked, her form flickering. In the clearing's center was a gnarled tree, its bark pulsing like a heartbeat. I doused it with oil from Mira's stores and set it ablaze. The lady's scream tore through the forest, the ground shaking, but I kept my eyes on the flames, never on her. When the tree was ash, the melody stopped, the air cleared, and the forest was just trees again. I stumbled home, singed and shaking, and found Mira waiting, her eyes wet. She didn't scold me, just held me tight. The lady was gone, or so I hoped, but I still wear the charm, and at night I keep my eyes closed, just in case. Terror from the fallen invisible fence. In the small town of Gray Hollow, where fog draped the streets like a shroud and the wind carried whispers of old secrets, our family home stood at the end of a quiet lane. It was a modest, weather-worn house, its paint chipped and its porch creaking underfoot. The backyard was bordered by a low stone wall, barely knee-high, that everyone assumed was just a relic from some long-forgotten garden. But the elders of Gray Hollow called it something else, the invisible fence. They said it wasn't the stones that mattered, but what they held back, something no one could see, yet everyone feared. I was 17, home from boarding school for the summer, when I learned what happened when that fence fell. My name is Caleb, and I'd always thought Gray Hollow's stories were just that, stories. My parents, both teachers, dismissed the town's superstitions as nonsense. But my great-uncle Amos, who'd lived in the house before us, was different. He'd visit sometimes, his eyes cloudy with age, muttering about keeping the line strong. I thought he was just eccentric until the night the terror began. It was a humid August evening, the air thick with the scent of rain and pine. I was in my room, headphones on, when I heard a crash from the backyard like stones tumbling. Followed by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the walls. I yanked off my headphones and ran to the window. The stone wall was in pieces, as if something had smashed through it. The backyard was dark, but the air shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. The wall was a mess, half its stones scattered across the grass. Beyond it, the forest loomed, its trees denser than I remembered, their branches swaying without wind. The hum was louder now, pulsing in my chest, and the air felt wrong too heavy, too cold for summer. I swept the flashlight beam across the trees, and for a moment, I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, its edges blurred like a smudge on glass. It vanished when the light hit it, but my skin prickled with the certainty that I was being watched. I ran back inside, locking the door, and called for my parents. They were in the kitchen, puzzled but unconcerned. "Probably just kids messing around," Dad said, peering out the window. Mom nodded, but her eyes lingered on the broken wall, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I didn't tell them about the shape or the hum. They wouldn't believe me. The next night, the hum returned, louder, joined by a scratching sound, like claws on wood. It came from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I checked the backyard again, and more stones were gone, as if something was dismantling the wall piece by piece. The forest seemed closer, its edge creeping toward the house. I called Uncle Amos, who lived in a nursing home an hour away. His voice was shaky but firm. "The fence is down, isn't it?" he said. "You need to fix it, Caleb. It's not just stones, it's a barrier." "A barrier for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Something old. Something that doesn't belong here." He told me the story over the phone, his words clipped with urgency. The stone wall wasn't just a garden feature. It was part of a ritual laid down generations ago to seal a rift, a tear in the world that led to somewhere else. The elders called it the invisible fence because its true power wasn't in the stones, but in the symbols carved beneath them, hidden in the earth. If the fence fell, the rift would open, and whatever lived on the other side could cross over. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Rebuild it," he said, "and don't look at what comes through." That night, I gathered the scattered stones, my hands shaking as the hum grew louder. The scratching turned to footsteps, heavy and uneven, circling the house. I worked fast, stacking the stones as best I could, but they felt wrong, like they were resisting me. The air grew colder, the shimmer in the forest brighter. I saw the shape again, closer now. Its form shifting, sometimes human, sometimes not. It didn't have a face, but I felt its hunger, its curiosity. I called my friend Maya, the only person in Grey Hollow who didn't laugh at ghost stories. She came over with a backpack full of salt and sage, things her grandmother swore by. "We need to find the symbols," she said, digging around the wall's base. "We found them faint carvings in the dirt, spirals and lines that made my head ache to look at. Some were smudged, as if something had clawed them away." The footsteps grew closer, now inside the yard. Maya sprinkled salt over the stones, muttering words her grandmother had taught her. The hum faltered, but the shape didn't leave. It stood at the edge of the forest, watching. I kept my eyes on the ground, remembering Uncle Amos's warning. Maya grabbed my hand, her voice steady. "Keep working. Don't look up." We rebuilt the wall, stone by stone, tracing the symbols with a stick when we couldn't find the originals. The air grew heavier, the hum now a low growl. Something brushed past me, cold and sharp, like a blade of ice. I flinched, but kept my eyes down, stacking the last stone. Maya lit the sage, its smoke curling upward, and the growl became a wila sound that wasn't sound, but a pressure that made my ears pop. Then, silence. The air cleared, the shimmer faded, and the forest was just trees again. The wall stood, uneven but whole. We stepped back, panting, and I risked a glance at the forest. Nothing. No shape, no hum, just the quiet